or struck me was Peter talking about listening to people's stories and describing community development as a relationship practice that builds people's ownership, and Carmel is going to talk more about that process in our next segment. Now, I've just got notes here, so I'm just gonna use my notes if that's okay, without losing too much eye contact with people. So when Peter's talking about community development as an intentional, that you're intentional about your practice and walking alongside people in the journey, and where everyone gets changed, I instantly sort of catapulted back into an experience I had when I was studying, and I attended a workshop by Dr. Lilla Watson, a Gungaloo woman who was teaching at the university, and she was trying to educate us about right way of thinking if seeking to enter community and work alongside Indigenous people. She said, and Peter alluded to it, but she said, if you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. If you have come because your liberation, let's work together. At the time, what Lilla said sort of spun me around. It sort of frightened me, but it also inspired me to examine myself, to examine the I, you know, the implicant is what we've been talking about in the past videos, to ask myself, what's driving my desire to work with disadvantaged people? And it raised real questions about how to be respectful and not to make more problems, but by coming with my own agenda. That is trying to get people to work on my idea in my way. So at the time, I'd been studying with Tony Kelly, and I was learning about community development. I was finding my heart and my head, you know, on fire with, you know, and just the passion I felt was really building. And I felt that I'd found a practice to address social justice and empowerment through collective action, because I like groups of people. I love working with groups of people. So I was pretty excited. So as part of the course, we had to do a little project, and I'd negotiated with a family friend to enter a community project on the outskirts of Brisbane in the west. And I met Rosemary Grundy, Rosemary Grundy, and another presentation sister who are living and working from an open house, a bit like the community of intention that Peter referred to on the video. Now, her project was to reach out to isolated and disadvantaged community members, and if desired by the people, to provide a resource to them to address issues that were of importance to them. Rosemary had told me that the women were all living in poverty, many in or recently out of domestic violence situations, and many of the women she had met were under child safety's attention. She talked a little bit about her practice to me before I entered her project, and the gentling work she'd been doing to encourage people to speak with her, to speak about their lives, so we can share their experiences with another person. And she invited me, to my delight, and she got permission from the women, but she invited me to join her and a few women who had agreed to meet for a shared meal the next Thursday night. So when I arrived at the meeting, there were about 4 or 5 women and an unknown number of children who seemed to be hanging out in the house and under the watchful eye of another sister. Rosemary casually introduced me as a student she'd mentioned earlier. I got some food and found a place to sit, and I felt very much like an outsider, and I was being checked out, of course. As the evening progressed and some terrible stories were shared, I was feeling quite uncomfortable with the lack of responses to the information and the silences. It was painful for me to hear that these women didn't have enough food to feed their children, that the food charity was treating them in a way that was making them feel that it was all their fault. So my desire was to jump in and ask more probing questions or to make suggestions. And I felt quite swamped by my feelings of lostness in the space and sort of ashamed in trying to relate, you know, not being able to relate in the right way. I was really struggling to find the words because really, to be honest, what all I was thinking is, how could I help? How could I help them? How could we do something together? I was scrambling around and defaulting to my helper, you know, really well learned problem solver role where I felt comfortable and in control. I knew I was losing feeling with the women, and I was failing in my goal to begin a connection through listening and appreciating each of the women's lived experiences. I made several suggestions which fell flat, leaving me feeling quite at sea and embarrassed. Rosemary made a time for a reflection session. She said to me, Maria, what was going on for you the other night? I said, oh, I don't know. I just wasn't able to connect or to listen or something. I felt nervous and unsure of myself. And she said, do you think you were trying to help them? And she said, do you really think that there is something that you can do to help these women? Can you even begin to imagine their lives, the lives that they've had and the things that they've survived? Did you hear how much strength they've had to have got through that? And I was sat on my bottom and, you know, I mean, she's a wonderful woman, so she didn't seek to humiliate me, but I was feeling embarrassed and I said, no, I don't know that. And she said, Maria, it's because you weren't really listening. You were listening for their problems, not listening for their spirit. And then she said to me, did you notice what I was doing? And I told her I hadn't noticed that she was doing much at all, but I felt that there was a quiet understanding between her and the women, sort of like they were relaxing more and more. She said, did you hear me directly responding to the hardships and problems they raised? Did you hear me offering solutions to the things they were talking about the other night? I said, no, not exactly, but there was a feeling. I did notice there was a positive feeling there, even though you weren't directly addressing the problems that they were talking about, but they were talking about them and they were acknowledging each other. And I just sort of, I could sense that the way it was going, that you guys were probably going to cook some ideas up. Anyway, that's sort of where I got to in that first day, night, whatever. And I found that experience very unnerving, as you can tell, but I understood from it how incredibly important the beginning processes of community development are to creating those connections where you start to begin, you begin to developing ownership of their own story, of the shared experiences. And that I can see how that could lead to chances for getting unstuck. And for those women creating new options, it was sort of a visceral experience. And so then from there, I understood that the emphasis is not about working out the problems and what the solutions are, but about creating this space between you and another person, or between people, or in small group, where there's that feeling of understanding, shared experience. So that is the story from my learning, and I'm very honoured to share it with you, although it's embarrassing. But and I've had some. Rosemary was the first. Well, no, Tony actually was the first, but Rosemary was one of the many great mentors I've had to help me work through that and all the ordering processes in community development and structuring. So thank you for listening to that.